Hello, welcome back to my channel. This is Aadi Achint. Today's video is about a pilot of the Indian Air Force who took on the might of the Pakistani Air Force in the eastern sector pretty much all by himself. His name is Flight Lt Flt AT Cooke, Vir Chakra. This man was born in the year 1939 in Agra and was very impressed with the fighter flying happening in that region during the Second World War. He joined the Indian Air Force. Just before the war started in 1965, he was at Kalaikunda, one of the bases opposing the Pakistani Air Force in the eastern sector. Before I go on with this story, may I request you to kindly like, subscribe to my channel, share my videos with your friends, and here is the story. When the war was going badly for the Pakistanis somewhere around the 6th of September, their Commander-in-Chief Air Marshal Noor Khan gave an order to his commands to attack the Indian Air Force air bases so as to prevent any retaliatory attack on towards their forces and their own Air Force bases spread across in the western sector as well as the eastern sector. This story is about the east. So 12 of Pakistani F-86F jets of the 14th Squadron Pakistani Air Force were based at Tejgaon in eastern Pakistan. This pretty much represented the total might of the Pakistani Air Force is in the eastern sector. So as I mentioned earlier, their Commander-in-Chief has told them to go ahead and attack the Indian air bases. This order was given somewhere around the 6th, but because the eastern sector was a little away from the western sector, this order never reached them. They planned an attack on the 7th. As a matter of fact, they conducted an attack on the Air Force station of Kalaikunda pretty successfully on the morning of the 7th. Meanwhile, realizing the attacks on the Indian Air Force bases on the 6th on the western sector, the Indian Air Force had already given orders to their fighters as well as their bombers to attack the Pakistani air bases all across the war front. On the night of 6th and 7th September, various Pakistani air bases were attacked by Indian Air Force aircraft, and of course on the eastern sector, one of the attacks hit the Pakistani Air Force base of Kumri Tola. Funnily speaking, the Pakistani Air Force base of Kumri Tola was attacked at 5 hours and 30 minutes on the 7th of September instead of actually attacking Tejgaon. One can only imagine if the Indian Air Force had gone and hit Tejgaon, all the Pakistani Air Force presence in the eastern sector would have gone null and void. This was due to contradictory intelligence that was provided for by the local sources in the eastern Pakistan region. Looking at and alarmed by the Indian Air Force attack at Kumri Tola, the commander of Tezgaon, Group Captain Ghulam Haider, directed the commanding officer of the Pakistani Air Force 14th Squadron leader Shabir Hussain, to immediately get airborne and attack the Indian stronghold at Kalaikunda, which is near Kharagpur, which was supposed to be the main hub of the offensive power of the Indian Air Force in the east. The aircraft of the 14th Squadron Pakistani Air Force, which were the F-86 Sabres, took off and went in to attack Kalaikunda at about 6 hours and 40 minutes in the morning of the 7th of September. This attack was quite successful. As a matter of fact, this raid achieved complete surprise over the Indian Air Force and destroyed about 6 Indian Air Force aircraft on the ground. The Pakistanis, of course, multiplied that by 2 and went around claiming 14 Indian Air Force Canberras, some Hunters, and so on and so forth was destroyed, which was a complete lie. As one attack is not enough to destroy a complete airbase, if you saw my videos on Sargodha, the Indian Air Force took about 5 or 6 attacks to completely destroy the airbase in the western sector. The commanding officer, which was Group Captain Ghulam Haider, decided to go for the juggler and literally destroy the Indian Air Force base, probably in his dreams. He thought that the Indian Air Force would be in a place of utter disarray and Pakistan would be able to go in and finish the job once and for all. He planned a trick. What he did was, he realized if they directly went towards Kalaikunda, the Indian Air Force radars as well as the combat air patrol as well as the observation units would pick them out. So what he did was, he proceeded towards a small place called Doodkhundi, which was a firing range of the Indian Air Force, turned west, and after that turned around and came in towards the base of Kalaikunda from the western side. The direction of the attack, he hoped, would fool the Indian Air Force into making a mistake with regards which way these aircraft was going. Haider also planned a little bit of a decoy. What he did was, he had another strike force going at about 25,000 feet in broad daylight within the eyes of the Indian Signals Unit, which is the SU or the radar, going in towards Calcutta, fooling the Indian Signals Unit that the raid was actually in Calcutta and this was a decoy. What they had planned to do was to divert the combat air patrol, which is the aircraft in the air as well as the guy sitting on the ground ready to take off in case of a detection towards Calcutta, leaving this airbase of Kalaikunda wide open for an attack by the second force which was coming Ghumake, if I may use the word. The two pilots on the ORP or in readiness position in the Kalaikunda airbase at the time was Flight Lieutenant Flt Lt AT Cooke, as well as his wingman, Flying Officer Mamgain. Now on the 7th of September 1965, Cooke and Mamgain, who flew their first mission from Kalaikunda at about 500 hours in the morning, providing for cover support for a raid that went into attack Jessore in Pakistan. This raid was led by the commanding officer of the 14th Squadron, Wing Commander Denis LaFontaine, who later on went to become the Chief of the Air Staff. At about 6 hours and 15 minutes, Cooke and Mamgain also provided for air cover for the returning aircraft landing into Kalaikunda. At 6 hours and 40 minutes, when the raid of the Pakistani Air Force actually hit Kalaikunda the first time, Cooke and Mamgain were at the tarmac getting their aircraft rearmed and refueled and were pretty much unable to do anything as the raid was in progress. They were pushed into their aircraft for a sortie at about 8 o'clock in the morning, once again when the signals unit officers informed them of unknown targets coming from the eastern side towards Dum Dum. After an hour's flying and looking for literally a needle in a haystack, without finding anything, they landed back at Dum Dum at about 9 o'clock in the morning. Now at about 10 o'clock, the duo was sitting in a bunker right next to the runway, fully armed, ready and itching for a fight. Little did they know that Flt Cooke is going to go down into history books by fighting not one, not two, not three, but 4 Pakistani sabers in the same sortie by getting himself entangled in the greatest air battle that the Indian subcontinent has seen. They were told to scramble for their flight for intercepting approaching targets from the east at about 25,000 feet, coming close to the international border. They took off within minutes of that call. They went on to altitude and started scanning the skies for any sign or the silver glints of the Pakistani sabers flying around in that area. Both of them were reaching for a fight. Both of them wanted to find the enemy and destroy him. During this time, the flight leader Cooke kept thinking to himself, why would the Pakistanis come and attack Dum Dum? Why would they not hit Kalaikunda once again to finish the job? He kept in touch with the 511 SU in that area, who kept telling them about this flight and directing them or vectoring them into their directions. During this time, as I mentioned again, Cooke kept thinking to himself, something is not right. Upon a recheck, he realized, and the signals unit informed them that these guys were on an orbit within their country. This made Cooke highly suspicious of their intentions. They realized that this could have been a decoy. That eerie feeling remained. He asked another signals unit, which was the 55 signals unit in Kalaikunda, whether they had noticed any unusual activity coming in from the eastern side. But the reply was a stern negative. Although getting the reply, he was still suspicious about Pakistani activity in this region and realized something was wrong. The Pakistani Sabre flight, which was commanded by Flight Lieutenant Halim, was flying in from the direction of 24 Paraganas as to make a swing about Kalaikunda and attack it from the westerly direction. I think they made a slight error in their navigation and came across a hillock where they had to increase their height before coming back down to the deck. At the time when the Pakistanis were doing this, Cooke and his partner kept on thinking about the fact that Barrackpore, Dum Dum and Kalaikunda were the 3 main air bases. Kalaikunda was already hit and damaged and could have been further damaged with another raid, depleting the Indian Air Force's capability to fight back in that region. Although Barrackpore and Dum Dum were not very special, and Cooke always thought to himself, why would the Pakistani Air Force take both of those airfields and leave the main one semi-damaged and still in a readiness platform to attack the Pakistanis from there? As this thought was going through, the 55 signals unit close to Kalaikunda had identified a couple of unidentified aircraft over a small hillock region, as I told you before, because the Pakistanis made a small error in their navigation. Upon receiving this message, Cooke literally jumped off his seat on this aircraft in excitement and shouted at the fighter controller to vector him off to Kalaikunda, as he was very sure that this strike force is going to hit Kalaikunda and nothing else. As fate would have it, the officer commanding of Kalaikunda at that point of time was Wing Commander Dickie Law, who was informed about the strike package coming towards him, taking a roundabout from the 24 Paraganas region or the Fort Canning region in that area. He ordered Cooke's flight to come over Kalaikunda and protect the base as best as they could. Formally tasked for the protection of this base, Cooke was overjoyed with this news and flew as fast as he could towards Kalaikunda. From flying at about 25,000 feet, they opened their throttles, took the hunters up to 0.9 Mach, which is about 500 knots, that's 90% of the speed of sound, in a shallow dive, arriving about 10 kilometers short of Kalaikunda, where they could have gone into attack positions behind the sabres. This entire activity happened between 10:15 and 10:30. 10:30 is the time when the Pakistan Strike Force arrived just short of Kalaikunda, waiting to pull up on towards their target to achieve their attack run. Looking at the fact that the Air Force base was being attacked, the Indian Air Force anti-aircraft fire opened up on the Pakistanis. But unfortunately, against moving sabres, the low intensity firing that the anti-aircraft units were able to provide was not very effective. The Indian Air Force personnel on that base jumped into their protective trenches to save themselves from the oncoming Pakistani attack. There were 4 sabres in the attack. 3 of them went in for dive attacks, whereas 1 remained high up in the air as their top cover. Just in the nick of time, the hunters flown by Flight Lt Cooke and Flying Officer Mamgain arrived on the scene to counter-attack the Pakistani sabres, doing their dance of death over Kalaikunda. The actual radio call that Cooke put out from his aircraft was like, and I quote, "Contact with 4 bogies over the runway." He said, "Look at those BASTARDS. They think they've already won the war. Let's go get them." Cooke ordered his wingman Mamgain to go after his sabre, who was at 5,000 feet, providing a top cover to the attacking sabres down below. He decided himself to take on 3 sabres, just 1 aircraft. Thus began the story of one of the greatest air battles fought by a pilot of the Indian Air Force in a ratio of 1 versus 3. The story of Cooke versus Sabre number 1. Cooke saw the flight lead, Flight Lieutenant Halim, going in for his attack run and quickly positioned his aircraft right behind Halim to take him down. Just then, Halim's number 4 saw Cooke taking position in front of his flight leader, came behind Cooke and tried to aim for a shot on Cooke's aircraft. One thing that I'd like to mention here is that the Sabre, on one hand, had a very good rate of turn because it was a smaller aircraft and a lighter aircraft than the Hunter. On the other hand, the Hunter's acceleration as well as its maneuverability was far ahead than that of the Sabre. Cooke knew this very well, and he knew even the enemy's aircraft very well. Just when Afzal Khan got behind Cooke's aircraft, he realized he had to take some evasive action to get off the line of fire. He took advantage of the Hunter's higher thrust-to-weight ratio, inverted his aircraft after a huge amount of scissor maneuvers, which is basically going behind each other. He brought himself right behind Afzal Khan's aircraft. Afzal Khan, in desperation, dove down towards the ground, and this battle went on to the treetops. Cooke had, after the battle, realized that during the time when he dove behind Afzal Khan, his wing actually touched one of the shrubs, damaging it just a little bit. In this turning and twisting fight, at sometimes 30 feet away above from the ground, Cooke positioned himself right behind Afzal Khan at about 400 yards and opened fire. The first few bullets hit Afzal Khan's Sabre and the aircraft literally exploded in the middle of the air, killing the pilot right there. Meanwhile, Flying Officer Mamgain, who was trying to fight off the Sabre at 5,000 feet on top cover, got behind him and got some shots off at that particular aircraft. As Cooke broke off from his attack on Afzal Khan, he realized that the flight leader and his number 2, Flight Lieutenant Tariq Habib, bounced on him from the behind, forcing Cooke to take some very evasive maneuvers to shake them off. They were firing continuously on towards Cooke's aircraft, and he managed to get out of the line of sight, protecting his Hunter with his skillful flying. Using the training that he was provided by some very good commanding officers of his, he brought his Hunter right behind Habib's aircraft and started firing a volley of shots from 300 yards, closing into about 100 yards. He could literally see pieces of that Sabre flying off. At that particular point of time, he realized that the flight lead, who was behind him for an attack, at this time he broke off, saw the first he was attacking of Habib straightening his wings and flying straight off towards the international border, trailing a huge amount of black smoke. Now it was between the flight leader of the Indian Air Force and the flight leader of the Pakistanis. The Pakistani got behind the Indian pilot and tried to shoot off some rounds. Cooke skillfully once again used the powerful engines of the Hunter and the better thrust to weight ratio and literally took off straight up into the sky. Looking at this, Halim followed him, but of course with the lower power could not keep up. He fell back towards the earth and Cooke came behind him in an advantageous firing position, closing into close to about 200 yards from Halim's aircraft. He started firing a volley of 30mm cannon of what ammunition he had on board on Halim's aircraft and literally saw bits and pieces of this Hunter flying around in the sky. Halim, upon realizing that this was no ordinary pilot that he was fighting, he got out of this dive and literally zoomed out of this region, flying with his tail between his legs straight onto Pakistan. During this battle, Cooke realized that he was out of ammunition and he saw the saber escaping and he knew there was no point chasing it as there was hardly anything that he could do about it. After this grueling air battle with literally 3 sabers, he calmed himself down, looked at his instruments in the aircraft just to check whether everything was okay, the amount of fuel that he had, the airspeed and the direction that he was flying in. He realized that he could not see the airspeed indicator. That is when he actually realized, as I told you earlier, that his wing had literally brushed a shrub on the ground, damaging the airspeed indicator spike, resulting in the figures not being shown in the cockpit. In the meantime, as I told you before, the second aircraft in the Indian flight, which was flying off some Marmagain, who was going behind Flight Lieutenant Bashir, who was flying top cover, got some hits on that aircraft. Unfortunately though, Bashir got behind Marmagain and started chasing him around. Looking at this, Cooke, without realizing and without thinking about the fact that he had no ammunition to fight on this saber, jumped in towards Bashir's aircraft, came in very close and literally ordered Marmagain to get off from this area and go back to base at Dum Dum. Cooke, with his superior flying skills, came behind Bashir and started giving him a chase. Bashir, realizing who he was fighting and what he had done to the other members of his flight, went on to an aerobatic display in the sky, doing barrel rolls, doing loops, doing all sorts of other split-S maneuvers just to get away from Flight Lieutenant Cooke's aircraft. He knew if Cooke got him in the middle of his gun sight, he was pretty much dead meat. This battle was seen on the roofs of the IIT Kharagpur by students standing there in amusement, the way this guy was trying to get away from the Indian aircraft to save his life. After a little while though, the Pakistani smelt a rat. He realized, although this pilot is very good, why isn't he shooting at me? Well, I don't think he really wanted to take any chances to stop and find out why. He literally put his tail between his legs, as the other people did, and ran back towards Pakistan. Cooke, who was not going to stop at this time, full of adrenaline, went behind Bashir's aircraft towards the eastern Pakistan area, the international border. He kept calling on to his colleagues to find out which was the Hunter on a combat air patrol so that this guy could have been brought down. He was dead wanting to make sure that the Pakistani did not reach back to base. He called and he called and he called, but sadly to no avail. He realized that he could not do much and his fuel was going down. He turned back around and made an approach towards Dum Dum. He did not have an airspeed indicator. His fuel was literally down on level E. He made a dramatic emergency landing at Dum Dum airport. Upon landing, he was literally so shaken up that he did not remember where he was. Towards the end of the runway, when he got off the runway towards the taxi track, his aircraft was out of fuel and switched off. You can only imagine it was a matter of seconds. When the Indian claims went out of single Indian Air Force pilot fighting down 4 sabers at the same time, the Pakistanis refuted all claims. They did accept 1 saber being shot down by the Indian Air Force, as well as the fact that 1 saber was rendered useless due to the lack of spares, to put it politely. But we all know what really happened to that aircraft. This is one of those stories where an Indian Air Force airbase literally depended on a single man in a single aircraft to fight off a whole flight of Pakistanis with no good intentions towards this airbase. He took his life on the palm of his hands and went in to fight a numerically larger enemy without any fear. This is the saga of the Indian Armed Forces, where every soldier, given an opportunity, would fight exactly the way Cooke did. Cooke was later on awarded the Vir Chakra for his gallant efforts in fighting off 4 Pakistani sabers and saving the Indian Air Force airbase at Kalaikunda. It was his on-ground, level-headed thinking which pushed him to realize that the Pakistanis were going to attack this airbase and kept him mentally prepared for this battle. This is one amongst many more stories that haven't been heard by our countrymen of the brave Indian soldier and how he fought tooth and nail to save his motherland. I'll be back with many such more videos, so stay tuned and of course subscribe to my channel, share my videos with your friends, and yes, share a thought for our soldiers standing in the battle lines today in the land, the sea and in the air against the Pakistanis who never stop and against the Chinese who we don't know what they're up to. Once a day, every day. Jai Hind!